On August 12, 2003, in a small town called Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a baby girl named Jasmine, just 1 year old, disappeared without a trace. The case deeply affected the community and left her mother, Monique Davis, trapped in an abyss of pain and silence for 20 years. Only an old photograph remained, until 2023, when an Instagram profile took her breath away. What happened in the end? Well, you'll want to see it with your own eyes. But before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The Arkansas summer sun was beating down hard, but for Monique, the world was dark. Today marked 20 years since her daughter Jasmine, just 1 year old, had disappeared without a trace. The little girl was known throughout Pine Bluff for one thing: her eyes, emerald green, as rare as they were unforgettable. Since that day, there had been no clues, nothing, just silence. Monique remembered her daughter not just as a happy baby, but as something unique. In a region of dark eyes, Jasmine's shone like precious stones. Her skin was dark and smooth, but those eyes were what everyone commented on. Some said they were a gift, others a sign. They called her the most beautiful baby in the area. Only one photo remained, taken by some church volunteers who had passed through town. In the photo, Monique holds her while Jasmine looks at the camera with those impossible eyes. That worn photo, aged by years and pain, was the only thing Monique had to remember her by. 20 years, an abyss of time that couldn't extinguish the flame of her search. The entire town had scoured the surrounding woods. Their cries for Jasmine were drowned out by the dense vegetation. Every dark corner, every possible hiding place was examined. Jasmine had simply vanished. For Monique, the lack of answers was a daily torture. The local police, with their limited resources, merely filed a report: an animal, kidnappers, a tragic accident. Theories were poison. Monique rejected them all. Her daughter, the girl with eyes like emeralds, couldn't be dead. Those eyes were a beacon, a promise. Life in Pine Bluff continued. Jasmine's tragedy became a sad whisper, but Monique never rested. Her search was a silent fever. Every stranger was met with a questioning look. She traveled to markets not to sell, but to glimpse the crowd for a flash of green. Her meager savings were squandered on false hopes offered by psychics. "Madness," they said. "Let her go," her sister begged. "Impossible." The photo of Jasmine was her only anchor, the reason her feet still moved every morning. Hope, however painful, was her only sustenance. The years in Pine Bluff slid by like mud after the rainy season, slow, heavy, leaving an indelible mark. For Monique, each cycle of seasons was another turn in the spiral of waiting that had become her only companion. Youth had withered from her face, now a scroll of wrinkles that told the story of her unceasing pain. Her hands, once strong from work as a hospital cleaner, now carried the tremor of age and anguish. But in the sanctuary of her memory, the image of Jasmine, especially those emerald green eyes, refused to age, shining with defiant intensity. Her solitude was somewhat relieved by the arrival of her nephew, Marcus. The young man, full of an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond the limits of their small town, brought a small rectangular device that, according to him, contained the entire world. A smartphone that he charged with an ingenious solar panel. Marcus, with the energy of youth, was determined that Monique would connect with the world. One afternoon, while the sky was torn by a summer storm that turned the outside into a liquid, thunderous hell, confining them in the darkness of the apartment, the young man insisted, "Look, Auntie, this is Instagram. It's like the market, but with people from all over showing their lives." Monique, with the resignation of someone who has fought greater battles, took the device. Her fingers, rough and clumsy, slid across the cold screen, watching a parade of images that were foreign and mostly incomprehensible. Food with artificially vibrant colors, young people making strange faces, landscapes of concrete cities that seemed to devour the sky. She was about to close her eyes, lulled by the monotonous passage of photos and the roar of the rain, when her finger stopped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It simply froze. In a corner of the screen, like a divine apparition or a trap of fate, a thumbnail showed a face. The face of a young woman with ebony skin and hair adorned in an intricate, sophisticated style. She was beautiful, with a beauty that radiated confidence, almost arrogance. But it wasn't her appearance that made Monique's heart stop like a drum beaten too hard, sending a wave of icy shock through her entire body. It was her eyes of an impossible color, an emerald green that seemed to absorb light and return it with the brilliance of the most precious raw gems. They were Jasmine's eyes, the girl. Monique's scream was a drowned whisper, a gasp that barely rose above the noise of the storm. Who is she? Her voice was fragile, brittle, as if the simple act of formulating the question might destroy the vision. The young man leaned in, looking at the screen with the carelessness of someone who doesn't understand the magnitude of the cataclysm being unleashed in his aunt's soul. Oh, she's a model. They say she's pretty famous in New York. Her name is... Marcus squinted to read the tiny letters below the photo. Olivia Bennett. Why, do you know her? Monique didn't hear the name. She heard nothing but the deafening echo of her own blood pounding in her ears. Olivia Bennett. A foreign, alien name. But those eyes, in them, she recognized the soul of her daughter. The face had blossomed, the child's contours transformed into the bone structure of a woman. The body was that of a stranger, but the eyes were Jasmine's sanctuary, the fingerprint of her existence, the living proof that Monique had waited for through 20 interminable years of sleepless nights and fruitless days of searching. The phone fell from her trembling hands, landing silently on the worn carpet. The image of Olivia Bennett glowed like a beacon in the darkness, stirring a wild hope, paralyzing fear, and a joy so painful it doubled her over and consumed her. Was it a hallucination? A cruel mirage woven by her longing? Or perhaps in the vast and incomprehensible digital ocean, she had finally found the shore she had been searching for so long? The name Olivia Bennett was a strange noise in Monique's head. She said nothing, but the eyes in the photo, those eyes held her. They were the only fixed point in her sea of doubts. The days that followed were a spiral of obsession. Monique barely ate. Sleep eluded her. Marcus, his heart shrinking as he watched his aunt wither away, tried to sow reasonable doubt. "Auntie, the world is very big. It could just be a resemblance," he said to her gently. But Monique ignored him. Certainty burned in her chest, a fire fed by an animal instinct that no logic could extinguish. Forcing Marcus's help, who was torn between fear of a new disappointment for Monique and great curiosity of his own, she began to devour every crumb of information about Olivia Bennett. Every photo, every post, every comment on social media was a piece under the magnifying glass of their desperate investigation. Olivia was a model, lived in New York. Her life was a parade of luxuries, travels, expensive clothes, glittering parties, a universe parallel to Monique's. But even in that world of artifice, there were more natural photos of Olivia, and in each one, those emerald green eyes seemed to communicate something that only Monique understood. The coup de grace came with an article that Marcus unearthed on a blog. Olivia Bennett was 21 years old, the exact age Jasmine would be. 20 years since the disappearance, plus the years she had been with Monique. The numbers didn't lie. Monique felt dizzy. Hope, a dangerous beast growing out of control, threatened to devour her if everything collapsed. But this time was different. It wasn't just a hunch. The shape of Olivia's nose, the curve of her lips, small details, almost erased by time, resurfaced in Monique's memory, matching with chilling precision the face of the model. Doubt, however, was a persistent toxin. The euphoria of almost touching her daughter mixed with the frozen terror of error. What if Olivia rejected her? What if she wasn't Jasmine? The fall would be final. But then she looked again at the photo, at those eyes. They were her compass, the only guide in the darkness. And now they pointed with merciless clarity toward New York. The decision was sealed in her soul, heavy and immovable. This was Jasmine. It had to be her, and Monique would find her. The decision was forged in the crucible of sleepless nights and feverish days of digital research. Monique would go to New York, find Olivia Bennet, and look her in the eyes, not through a screen but face to face. The conviction was as solid as the ground beneath her feet, but the path was strewn with obstacles that seemed insurmountable for a woman of her age and circumstances. She had no money. She barely spoke a few rudimentary phrases of proper English, beyond her southern dialect. And the concept of traveling to New York was as alien as the idea of flying in a giant metal bird across the country. When she communicated her intention to Marcus, the young man looked at her with a mixture of admiration and deep concern. "Auntie, that's impossible," he exclaimed. "New York is very far. It costs a fortune to get there. And what will you do? When you arrive? How will you find her?" Marcus's logic was overwhelming, but it didn't account for the stubbornness of a mother's heart that had glimpsed hope after a long night. Monique began to sell her few possessions. First, the small collection of antiques that remained from her mother, then the colorful fabrics that she had diligently sewn over the years. She even thought about selling the small plot of land that provided her sustenance, an idea that horrified her relatives. "Have you gone mad, Monique?" Her older brother reprimanded her. "You'll leave your home, your land, everything you know for a fantasy, a face in a machine." Her family's disbelief was a wall against which her plans conflicted. No one, except perhaps Marcus, in his most compassionate form, seemed to understand the force that motivated her. For them, Jasmine was a painful memory, a wound that time had tried to close. For Monique, she was a living presence, a constant call. Her most precious possession, the only one she refused to sell, was the yellowed photograph of Jasmine. She always carried it with her, wrapped in a piece of clean cloth, kept close to her heart. That image was her compass, her talisman, the only tangible proof she had that the young woman with the hypnotic eyes on Instagram was indeed her lost daughter. She knew the world would laugh at her, that authorities would take her for a senile old woman. But in that photo, in the innocence of that childish gaze, resided a truth that transcended any logic. With iron determination and after several months of sacrifices and circumventing local bureaucracy with the intermittent help of a compassionate official whom Marcus managed to contact, Monique got a passport and, miraculously, a bus ticket to New York. The ticket, paid for with the sum of all her sales and the secret help of Marcus, who sold some of his belongings without Monique knowing, was one way. There was no money for a return. Monique didn't need it. She was going to find her daughter, and that was the only thing that mattered. On the day she left, the neighborhood saw her off with a mixture of pity and amazement. As the old bus trudged down the dusty road, Monique pressed the photo of Jasmine against her chest. The journey was madness, a desperate bet against a cruel fate. But for the first time in 20 years, she didn't just feel pain. She felt the vertigo of action, the tension of a mission that, against all odds, she was about to undertake. New York devoured her. The Port Authority bus terminal was a monster of noise, lights, and a whirlwind of strange faces. Monique, clutching her bag with the photo of Jasmine and her last savings, felt like an ant in a giant anthill. The little proper English she had memorized disappeared. Only the image of Olivia Bennet's eyes, burned into her mind, kept her moving. The first days were a nightmare. A cheap room in a hostile neighborhood, a useless map, and the constant slap of indifference from a city that didn't stop for anyone. She searched for those emerald green eyes on every corner, in every anonymous face on the subway, in parks full of strangers, but found only frustration. The modeling agencies were impregnable fortresses for an old black woman with no appointment and broken English. Her money was disappearing. Doubt, like a worm, began to gnaw at her determination. She was just a crazy old woman chasing a chimera. One afternoon, despair took hold of her. She was crying silently on a park bench, the photo of Jasmine in her trembling hands when a voice startled her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" It was a tall young woman with dark skin and bright eyes. Her English was clear, but with an accent. "I'm Maya Johnson. she introduced herself, sitting down next to her. "I'm a law student at NYU. Can I help you with something?" Monique, hearing her speak with a kindness she hadn't encountered since arriving in the city, felt a relief so deep she almost fainted. In the warmth of this stranger's concern, Monique poured out her soul. She told the story of Jasmine, the disappearance, the 20 years of anguish, and the discovery on Instagram that had brought her here. She showed her the photo, her only fragile proof. Maya listened, her expression transforming from surprise to deep empathy. She took the photo with delicacy. "Those eyes are incredible, Ms. Davis. Your story is heartbreaking." She paused, a decision forming in her gaze. "I'm a law student specializing in family reunification. I offer pro bono legal assistance. I don't promise miracles, but let me try. You crossed half the country. You deserve a chance. A spark." That was what Monique felt. A small light in the immense darkness. Maya gave her contact information and explained the difficulty of approaching someone like Olivia Bennett, protected by her wealth and her agents. But she promised to investigate, to research records, to do the impossible. That night, in her room alone, Monique felt a weight lifted. She wasn't alone anymore. An angel, a law student named Maya, had crossed her path. The uncertainty remained there, tense, but now shared. With a new determination propelled by Maya's support, Monique felt that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't fighting against the wind alone. Maya, true to her word, began to move with the efficiency and tenacity of an experienced lawyer, despite her youth. She explained to Monique that the first step, and the most diplomatic, would be to try formal contact with the Bennett family. She sent a carefully written letter, setting out the reason for her inquiry in a way that didn't sound accusatory, but rather as a request for information of vital importance. She mentioned the incredible resemblance of Olivia to a girl who disappeared in Arkansas 20 years ago and attached a copy of the only photo of Jasmine. The response didn't take long to arrive, but it wasn't what they had hoped for. A high-caliber law firm representing the Bennetts responded with a cold, cutting letter. They absolutely denied any possibility that Olivia Bennett was the missing girl. They claimed with legalistic certainty that Olivia was adopted in the United States through completely legal and verifiable channels. The girl, according to them, came from a biological American mother with dependency issues, residing in another state, whose identity was protected by adoption laws, but whose medical history and waiver of custody were duly documented. Any attempt to contact the Bennett family or Olivia directly, they warned, would be considered harassment, and appropriate legal measures would be taken. The letter was a steel wall designed to intimidate and dissuade. Monique felt the hope that had blossomed with Maya's help wither. "What will we do now?" she asked the young lawyer, despair tinging her voice. "We won't give up so easily," Maya replied, although her face reflected the difficulty of the new obstacle. "This response is standard. In these cases, they're protecting their client, but it also gives us information. They know we're here, and they know our intentions." Maya decided that a more direct approach, though risky, was necessary. She managed, through contacts and admirable persistence, to get the address of the Bennett residence, an imposing mansion in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods of the city. She knew that showing up without publicity was a bold move, almost a provocation, but felt that Monique needed at least the opportunity for Olivia to see her, even if from a distance. One morning, they gathered their courage and took a taxi to the mansion. The property was surrounded by high walls and a wrought iron fence. A uniformed security guard intercepted them before they could even get close to the intercom. Maya tried to explain the situation, but the guard, clearly instructed, refused to let them pass or announce their arrival. When Monique, in a fit of desperation, tried to show the photo of Jasmine through the car window to the guard, he threatened to call the police. Defeated, they returned to Monique's modest hotel room. Just when frustration threatened to consume them, Maya's phone rang. It was from the Bennett's law firm. Surprisingly, and perhaps as a way to control the narrative and avoid a scandal if Monique persisted, they offered a meeting, not with the parents, but with Olivia Bennett herself. They insisted it would be brief, at a neutral location, a conference, room in their law offices, and with the presence of lawyers from both sides. Olivia was informed that a woman from Arkansas erroneously believed she could be a distant lost relative. Monique could barely contain her nerves. On the day of the meeting, she wore her best clothes, those she had brought from Arkansas for a special occasion she never imagined would be like this. Olivia Bennett entered the conference room accompanied by a severe-looking lawyer. She was even more impressive in person than in the photos. Tall, slender, with a natural elegance that only expensive clothes emphasized, and her eyes, seeing them live, so close, made Monique's heart give a painful reversal. They were Jasmine's eyes. There was no doubt about that, but Olivia's gaze was cold and distant. She listened to Monique's story, translated by Maya with an expression of polite disbelief. When Monique, with trembling hands, offered her the photo of Jasmine, Olivia looked at it briefly and returned it with an almost imperceptible gesture of disdain. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am," said Olivia, her voice cultured and without a trace of emotion. "But you're wrong. I was born in this country. My parents adopted me legally. This story about a girl who disappeared in Arkansas has nothing to do with me. I understand there may be a resemblance, but that's all." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I hope you find your daughter someday, but I'm not her." Olivia's coldness, her absolute denial, was like a slap in the face to Monique. When the young woman left the room, leaving a desolate Monique and a thoughtful Maya, the Bennett's lawyer approached Maya. "As you can see," he said with smugness, "this has been a waste of time for everyone. I suggest your client accept reality and put this matter to rest." The wall of disbelief seemed higher and more impenetrable than ever. Monique sank into desolation after the meeting. Olivia Bennett's icy refusal was a blow. Maya tried to keep hope alive. "Sometimes the most direct denial hides the deepest doubt, Monique. We won't stop." While Maya was fighting on the legal and media front with discretion, trying to connect the Bennetts to Arkansas, Monique wandered through New York, a ghost clinging to the photo of Jasmine. Each child's laugh was a dagger. Would Olivia think of her? Would she feel some void? And indeed, the encounter disturbed Olivia more than she would admit. The image of Monique, her sad but firm eyes, the photo of the baby with those same eyes were haunting her. At first, she called it a scam, a delusion. Her adoptive parents, the Bennetts, repeated to her the official story of her impeccable adoption, showing her documents. "She's a poor, confused woman, darling," her mother assured her with studied sweetness. "Don't let it affect you." But doubt is a resilient seed. Olivia began to question her own reflection, her emerald green eyes, her signature as a model. Where did such particular genetics come from if her adoptive parents had common European features? She remembered her childhood questions about her other mother, always answered with the same evasive story. The details that Monique told about Arkansas, about baby Jasmine, were too vivid, too loaded with an emotion that Olivia felt she couldn't ignore. The photo of the baby, though worn, caused her a strange sensation of déjà vu. Fleeting images began to assault her: the smell of wet earth, the echo of church bells, a dense heat, fantasies or fragments of an erased past. The tension increased. One night, no longer able to bear the uncertainty, Olivia pressed the Bennetts. "Is there anything at all you haven't told me about my adoption?" She saw panic cross their gazes before they recovered their composure and repeated the official version, but their nervousness was evident. Days later, compulsively reviewing family albums looking for some crack in the story, Olivia found a Chisai photo of herself at about 3 years old wearing a colorful dress. A chill ran through her. The design, the colors were disturbingly similar to those of the baby dress in Monique's photo. Another coincidence? The concern became a crack in the wall of their certainties. The story of that old woman from Arkansas was no longer a distant madness. It was an insistent whisper, growing louder inside her own head. The denial was beginning to give way to fear and a strange need to know. Olivia Bennett's concern grew day by day, fueled by fragmented memories. and inconsistencies that she now saw everywhere. Monique's story, once a distant and easily dismissible tale, now resonated with a strange familiarity. She spent hours on the internet, not looking for fashion trends or researching for her next photo session, but comparing the photo of baby Jasmine with her own childhood photos that the Bennetts had provided her. The resemblance in the eyes was undeniable, but now she was beginning to see other similarities. The shape of the chin, the hairline, they could be simple genetic coincidences, whims of nature, or was there something more? One night, unable to sleep, Olivia confronted her adoptive parents in a more direct way than she had ever done before. "Are you absolutely sure there isn't anything more to my adoption story? No detail that you've omitted, no matter how small?" The Bennetts, visibly uncomfortable with their daughter's intensity, reiterated their version. "Darling, we've told you everything," Mr. Bennett said in a tone that was trying to be reassuring, but to Olivia seemed forced. "You were a blessing to us, a gift. The agency assured us that everything was legal and transparent." But Olivia noticed the quick exchange of glances between them, the way Mrs. Bennett wrung her hands. There was a tension in the air that she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson didn't stop in her efforts. She knew that confronting a powerful family like the Bennetts required more than Monique's word and an old photograph. She needed strong evidence. She formally requested access to Olivia's adoption records, but encountered the expected legal resistance and the walls of privacy. However, the lawyer had an ace up her sleeve. She began to anonymously and very calculatedly filter small pills of the story to some contacts in local media and social justice blogs, focusing on the human drama of a mother from Arkansas searching for her lost daughter and the strange physical resemblance. She wasn't looking for a scandal, but to generate subtle pressure, public interest that would make ignoring the case more uncomfortable for the Bennetts than addressing it. Maya's strategy began to bear fruit. Short online articles, posts in forums about missing persons, topics on social media commenting on the strange coincidence of the eyes. The name of Olivia Bennett, though not directly accused of anything, began to associate with the story of the Arkansas girl. For a model whose public image was everything, this was a problem. Olivia began to receive direct messages on her Instagram, some in support of Monique, others simply curious. The pressure, though discreet, was palpable. One afternoon, Maya received an unexpected call. It was Olivia Bennett's lawyer, not her parents. Olivia herself had requested a new meeting, this time just her and Monique with Maya present. She wanted to talk, to ask questions without the intimidating presence of her family's lawyers. Monique felt a shock in her heart. Was it a sign that Olivia was beginning to believe? The second meeting was in a quiet cafe, far from the law offices. Olivia arrived alone, dressed casually without the glamour of her photos. She looked tired. Her eyes revealed nights of insomnia. "Why are you so sure I'm her?" was the first thing she asked Monique. No preambles. Monique, with Maya's help as a translator, spoke with heartbreaking sincerity. She described not just the physical characteristics, but the small details. A small birthmark, almost invisible behind Jasmine's left ear. The way she wrinkled her nose when something displeased her. Her favorite lullaby. As Monique spoke, Olivia listened attentively, her gaze fixed on the old woman. She took a tablet from her bag and showed Monique a photo of herself as a baby, one that had never been shown before, where a small mark was almost invisible behind her ear. "Is this what you're referring to?" Monique repressed a gasp and nodded. Then Olivia hummed a simple, almost childish melody. Was this the song? Monique's eyes filled with tears. It was the lullaby, the same one she sang to Jasmine every night. The impact was brutal. Olivia paled, her own defenses crumbling in the face of the emotional evidence. "I need to know the truth," whispered Olivia, more to herself than to the other two women. "If there's even a minimal possibility, I need DNA proof." The fight for truth had entered a new and decisive phase. Olivia's request for DNA tests lit a light. Maya Johnson acted quickly, but the Bennetts, cornered, imposed a condition through their lawyers. if the DNA confirmed Monique's maternity, they would not face criminal charges. Olivia, still clinging to the innocence of those who raised her, insisted on this point. For Monique, it was a bitter pill. Give up justice? Maya was pragmatic. Monique, it's this or risk a long process, with no guarantees. First, the truth about Jasmine. Monique, with her soul in suspense, accepted. Knowing was more urgent than punishing. The sampling at the private clinic was a moment of contained tension. Monique, with the photo of Jasmine like a rosary between her fingers, barely breathed. Olivia, with a forced calm that fooled no one, avoided her gaze. The Bennetts shone by their absence, a silence that screamed guilt. The weeks of waiting for the results became a strange interlude. Unexpectedly, Olivia sought out Monique. Their first meetings, mediated by Maya, were cautious, but Olivia's curiosity, once released, was a torrent. She wanted to know about Arkansas, the town, the baby that Monique described with a love that transcended time and distance. Monique, with a mixture of joy and fear of getting too excited, told her about Jasmine, about her little quirks, about the light in her unique eyes. There were no reproaches, just the harsh truth of a mother and her pain. Olivia listened, and in Monique's humility, in the dignity of her poverty and the immensity of her pain, she began to see more than a resemblance. She saw the truth. During a tea in Monique's modest hotel room, she observed the old woman moving, folding clothes, humming a melody while serving. Simple gestures that resonated with Olivia, with unexpected depth, confronting the superficiality of her own model life with the overwhelming authenticity of that woman. Although a part of Olivia still resisted, screaming that it was a mistake, that she was Olivia Bennett, another part grew stronger and secretly wished the DNA would confirm the impossible. The invisible blood tie was already flowing, uniting these two souls across the abyss of their lives, while the definitive answer hung by a thread. The wait was agony, but for the first time an agony tinged with real hope. The call from the laboratory came on a cold Tuesday morning, 3 long and agonizing weeks after the sampling. Maya Johnson was the first to receive the news. She asked Monique and Olivia to join her in her small but cozy office, a space filled with law books and an optimism that to Monique seemed a balm. The air in the room was dense, charged with an almost unbearable expectation. Monique had barely slept the night before, reliving over and over again the face of Jasmine, of Olivia, the similarities, the differences, the 20 years that separated them. Olivia, for her part, was showing external composure, but the slight trembling in her hands as she accepted a cup of tea that Maya offered her revealed her nervousness. Maya placed an official envelope on the table. "The results are here," she said, with a calm she didn't feel. She looked at the two women. "Before I open this, I want you to know that whatever the result, you are both incredibly strong and brave for having come to this point. And whatever happens, I'll be here to support you." Monique closed her eyes for an instant, murmuring a silent prayer. Olivia fixed her gaze on the envelope as if it contained the answer to all the enigmas of her existence. Maya took a letter opener and with a steady hand tore the paper firmly. She extracted a document with an official letterhead and began to read silently, her eyes quickly scanning the lines of technical text. Monique observed every micro-expression on the lawyer's face, trying to decipher the verdict before it was pronounced. The seconds became eternal. Finally, Maya looked up. Her eyes met first with Monique's, and a slight smile, almost imperceptible but loaded with meaning, was drawn on her lips. Then she looked at Olivia. "The probability of maternity," Maya began, with a clear voice but tinged with emotion, "between Ms. Davis and you, Olivia, is 99.9999%. Silence. A silence so absolute that Monique could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. Then a drowned sob gushed from her throat, a sound that contained 20 years of pain, of searching, of longing, tears. Those old companions rolled freely down her wrinkled cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a release so deep it left her breathless. It was Jasmine. Her Jasmine. Olivia remained motionless, pale as the paper Maya was holding. The world around her seemed to shift. The words 99.99999% echoed in her head. Part of her, the part that had begun to suspect, to connect the dots, felt a strange confirmation. But another part, the Olivia Bennett who had been raised in luxury and safety, the daughter of the Bennetts, resisted. She refused to accept a truth that destroyed the foundations of her identity. No. Maybe, Olivia whispered, more to herself than to the others. She looked at Monique, at that woman from Arkansas who claimed to be her mother, and saw the reflection of her own eyes filled with tears. The connection was undeniable, biological, irrefutable, but accepting it meant that her entire life had been a lie. Her parents, Richard and Elizabeth Bennett, had lied. The story of the drug-addicted mother, the legal adoption, was all a farce. Confusion gave way to anger and then to a frozen panic. She stood up abruptly, knocking over the cup of tea which shattered on the floor. "I need to go," she stammered, heading toward the door. Maya tried to stop her. "Olivia, wait, let's talk about this." But Olivia was already leaving the office, fleeing from a truth that overwhelmed her. Monique, despite her own shock, felt a pang of pain seeing her daughter's reaction. This wasn't the joyful reunion she had dreamed of for so many years. It was an earthquake, a revelation that threatened to destroy everything Olivia had known. That same afternoon, Olivia confronted the Bennetts. She arrived at the family mansion like a hurricane, with the DNA report in hand. "Explain this to me," she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "Who is Monique Davis, and who am I, really?" The Bennetts, confronted with irrefutable evidence, tried to maintain their composure, but their pale faces and evasive looks betrayed them. They insisted on their innocence, on the legality of the adoption. "Darling, there must be a mistake in that test," said Mrs. Bennett, trying to embrace her. "We love you. We're your family." "Don't touch me," Olivia shouted, backing away. "I've been lied to my entire life. I want the truth." The facade of the perfect family cracked, revealing the painful cracks of a secret kept for far too long. The undeniable truth had come to light, and its consequences were only beginning to be felt. The DNA result hit Olivia Bennett like a tsunami. She fled from the world of the Bennetts, from Monique, from Maya. Her luxury apartment became her bunker, a refuge against a truth that threatened to annihilate her. Her life, a lie. Her parents, strangers who had bought her. For days, the shock paralyzed her. She avoided calls, messages. She needed silence to hear the roar of her world crumbling, but the implacable truth infiltrated her sleepless nights. The image of Jasmine in the photo, now with biological certainty, was her own infant. Reflection. Forgotten details emerged. An inexplicable aversion to certain flavors that Monique had described as everyday life in her small town. Recurring dreams of a muddy river under a brutal sun. An African-American spiritual that she sometimes hummed, without knowing why. Her loyalty to the Bennetts violently clashed with the harsh reality of her origin. Her adoptive parents' excuses became increasingly false, more desperate. Finally, denial gave way. She couldn't live in the shadows. She contacted Maya Johnson, her voice now tinged with cold determination. "Maya, I want to know everything," she said. And the use of the name Jasmine, when referring to herself in the past, was a point of no return. How did I get to the Bennetts? If they lied, who else did? Someone tore me from Monique's arms. I want to know who. With Olivia's support, the investigation was reactivated with fury. It was no longer just the search for a mother, it was the beginning of dismantling a possible criminal network. The authorities, with the DNA as a battering ram, turned their eyes to the Bennetts and any connection with Arkansas. Maya focused on the church group that had visited Monique's town 2 decades ago. The files were a chaos of yellowed papers and incomplete data, but Maya's persistence was legendary, a stroke of luck. A former mission coordinator, retired in Florida, had kept old diaries. Among the lists of missionaries who were in Arkansas near the date of Jasmine's disappearance, two names caught attention: Richard B. and Elizabeth B. Initial, names that matched Richard and Elizabeth Bennett, though the full surnames were missing or illegible. And though the names were common, the connection was too explosive to ignore. Maya took this bomb to the detectives. It wasn't definitive proof of kidnapping by the Bennetts, but it placed them at the place and time. It brutally denied their story of a pure United States adoption. The Bennetts' web of lies was stretched to the limit, and the investigation was just beginning to tear the veil off something much more sinister. The Bennetts' connection to the Arkansas town, however tenuous it might initially seem based only on source names and initials in fragmented missionary records, was enough for detectives to intensify their scrutiny. It was no longer a simple coincidence of physical resemblance. Now there was a possible geographical and temporal link. The investigators, armed with DNA tests and new documentary evidence, requested a new interview with Richard and Elizabeth Bennett. This time the tone was different. It wasn't the family's lawyers who controlled the conversation. It was the detectives who asked the hard questions. They presented evidence of their possible presence in Arkansas at the time of Jasmine's disappearance. They showed the records of the missionary group. The Bennetts tried to deny, to distort. "Yes, we did missionary work many years ago," admitted Richard Bennett nervously. "But we visited many regions, many states. We don't remember all the specific places," Elizabeth quickly added. "And we certainly didn't participate in anything illegal. Our adoption of Olivia was here in the United States, completely supervised." But the detectives didn't yield. The pressure increased. They reminded them of the severe penalties for perjury and obstruction of justice. They painted a clear picture for them. The biological evidence was irrefutable, and their link with the place of origin of the girl, though circumstantial for now, raised serious suspicions about the veracity of their story of a purely domestic adoption. The possibility of a public scandal, seeing their names and reputation begin to be tarnished, weighed on them more than any legal argument. It was Elizabeth Bennett who broke first. Tears began to roll down her face while her husband looked at her with a mixture of panic and warning. "We didn't know she was stolen," she sobbed. "I swear on my life we didn't know." Richard Bennett tried to silence her, but it was too late. The hatch had opened. Caught under the threat of more serious criminal charges hovering over them, if it was discovered that they had lied under oath about Olivia's origin. The Bennetts finally confessed a part of the truth, a version carefully constructed to minimize their guilt. They admitted that, desperate to have a child after years of infertility and failed adoption processes in the United States, they had explored international adoption options. Through a contact they met during one of their missionary trips, a man who presented himself as a humanitarian facilitator, they were offered the opportunity to accelerate the adoption of an orphaned girl from a remote Arkansas town. "They told us the girl had no one," explained Richard Bennett, his voice now devoid of his previous arrogance, "that her parents had died and that her future in that town was uncertain. They asked us for a considerable donation to cover legal expenses, transportation, and to ensure the well-being of the girl's community. We paid the current equivalent of about $200,000. They insisted that they believed they were acting in good faith, helping a needy girl and fulfilling their dream of being parents. They claimed that the contact assured them that all procedures were legal, though perhaps not orthodox according to Western standards. They were handed baby Jasmine, along with adoption papers that, according to them, seemed legitimate, though they never verified their authenticity with Arkansas or American authorities in an exhaustive manner. If we had known, if we had suspected for a moment that she was a stolen girl, we would never have done it," Elizabeth concluded between sobs. "We loved Olivia as if she were our own blood. We just wanted to be parents." The confession, though, partial and self-indulgent, was the climax of the investigation into the Bennetts. They admitted to having paid an exorbitant amount for a girl, having taken her out of her state of origin through irregular channels, and having lied about her origin for 20 years. Although they continued to deny knowledge of the kidnapping, their participation in an obscure conspiracy was now undeniable. The attention of the investigators and Maya Johnson then focused on the key figure that the Bennetts revealed, the mysterious humanitarian facilitator who had orchestrated Jasmine's delivery. The true magnitude of the criminal network was about to be exposed. The Bennetts' confession, however designed to protect themselves, opened a portal to a much deeper, darker underworld. Their humanitarian facilitator, the man who delivered Jasmine to them in exchange for a considerable sum, became the new epicenter of the investigation. The detectives, with the information provided by the Bennetts, a name, James Wilson, and a vague physical description from 20 years ago, began to pull the thread. Maya Johnson, working in parallel, used her own resources to track this individual, fearing that if they depended only on the authorities' channels, Wilson might disappear before being found. James Wilson wasn't just any missionary. Deeper research revealed that although he participated in various humanitarian missions in the United States and other countries, his true business operated in the shadows. He used the facade of charitable organizations to identify vulnerable children, often in areas of conflict or extreme poverty, and then, through a network of corrupt local contacts, facilitated quick and discreet adoptions for wealthy and desperate Western couples. These adoptions, of course, had nothing legal or ethical about them. They were secret kidnappings, commercial transactions with human lives. It was discovered that Richard and Elizabeth Bennett, who appeared in the missionary records of Monique's town, weren't the only couple involved. Wilson had a network of clients spanning multiple states. The Bennetts simply coincided on an earlier missionary trip with Wilson, who, upon learning of their desperation to have a child, offered them this solution. Wilson's trail led investigators to several states and multiple false identities. He was finally located in a small town in Oregon, living a life of discreet luxury, financed by the suffering of countless families. His arrest was coordinated with international authorities and was not without tension, as Wilson tried to flee once again. During the interrogation, and faced with compelling evidence that included testimonies from other deceived families and the trail of money from the Bennetts, Wilson began to talk. He revealed chilling details of his operation. He admitted having bribed a man in Monique's town, a person known for his small scams and his economic desperation, to kidnap Jasmine. The description of the baby, with extraordinary eyes, reached Wilson's ears, and he knew it would be easy to place with a family willing to pay more for such a special girl. The payment to the townsman was very little, $5,000, a fraction of what Wilson received from the Bennetts. A month after the kidnapping, the townsman disappeared from Pine Bluff, telling his neighbors that he was going to seek a better life in the city. He was never heard from again. His whereabouts remain a mystery to this day, another piece in the puzzle of Monique's pain. Wilson's confession was the key to dismantling an extensive network of child trafficking that operated with impunity for more than 2 decades under the pretext of humanitarian aid. More than 30 children were found who had been victims of this network, torn from their families and sold to the highest bidder. Other members of the organization, accomplices at different levels, were identified and arrested in various states. The case of Jasmine, the girl with emerald green eyes, became the catalyst that finally exposed and brought down a criminal empire built on stolen innocence. Justice, though late, began to gain strength, not just for Monique and Jasmine, but also for dozens of other families shattered by the greed and cruelty of this network. The trials that followed were long and exhaustive, exposing the world to James Wilson's chilling network and the personal tragedy of Monique and Jasmine Olivia. Wilson and several of his key accomplices were sentenced to long prison terms for human trafficking, kidnapping, and fraud. Olivia's testimony, though painful, was crucial to securing convictions. The Bennetts, in turn, faced charges of adoption fraud and obstruction of justice for illegal payment, and lies about Jasmine's origin. Although it was proven that they weren't directly involved in the initial kidnapping, their desperation and willingness to operate outside the law made them unwitting accomplices to Wilson's crime. They lost legal custody of Olivia to her biological mother and received suspended sentences and heavy fines, But perhaps their greatest punishment was the loss of trust and unconditional love from the young woman they raised. Olivia, now with her complete identity revealed and the truth of her past revealed, found herself at an emotional crossroads. On one hand, she felt deep love and gratitude for the Bennets who, despite the deception at the foundation, had provided her with a life of privileges, education, and affection. On the other hand, a powerful yearning to connect with Monique, her biological mother, and with the culture and land of her ancestors. She decided not to break ties with the Bennets, recognizing that the love she felt for them was real, though their relationship would now be colored by the bitter truth. However, she made them a strong request that they use part of their considerable fortune to make amends for the harm caused. Moved by the maturity and grace of Olivia, and perhaps seeking a form of redemption, the Bennets agreed. They donated $500,000 directly to Monique and another $500,000 to create a community development fund in her hometown in Arkansas. This fund would be used to improve education, health, and economic opportunities for the people of the region, seeking to transform the pain of an individual loss into an opportunity for collective growth. Monique, with wisdom forged in suffering, decided that money wouldn't give her back the years lost with her daughter, but it could help prevent other mothers from going through her ordeal. She used the donation to establish the Emerald Eyes Foundation, an organization dedicated to combating human trafficking in the United States, to educating communities about the dangers, and to offering support to victims and their families. Her work, born of the deepest wound, became a beacon of hope for many. Olivia began to divide her time between New York and Arkansas. The trips to her mother's town were an awakening. She immersed herself in the culture, learned about her ancestors, listened to the stories of her people, and it seemed a part of her soul, previously dormant, came back to life. The emerald green eyes that once made her a target now were a symbol of connection, a bridge between two worlds. She continued working as a model, but now using her platform to give voice to those who didn't have one, becoming an ambassador for her mother's foundation. The relationship between Monique and Olivia flourished, not without difficulties, but with deep and resilient love. They rebuilt their bond day by day, sharing tears for the past and smiles for the present. Monique never recovered the 20 lost years, but she found a peace she believed impossible. The void in her heart, that black hole of doubt and yearning, finally began to fill, not with forgetting, but with truth, justice, and the rediscovered love of a daughter who, against all odds, had returned home. The story of the baby with the miraculous eyes, once a sad legend in the town, became a testimony to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit and the redemptive power of truth. And if you enjoyed learning about this story, don't forget to subscribe to receive more content like this and updates on similar cases. Leave your like and your opinion about the case in the comments. It helps the channel a lot. Thank you very much, and see you soon.